Hello, Old Outdoor Broad here, coming to you today from Hovenweep National Monument on the Utah-Colorado border. And yes, wearing my UCLA softball shirt. Today is May 28th, and the Women's College World Series starts today. And as fate would have it, UCLA is playing today, and I actually have some cell service here. So later today, I'm going to actually try to watch that game, to stream that game. If I do, great. If I don't, that's okay too. Either way, go Bruins. That being said, what I want to talk about today is power. And for whatever reason, this is a topic that I really enjoy. And it's one of the things on this camper that I really like tinkering with, is figuring out how to make the most of the power system and get the most out of it. And then just a caveat before we get started. When I bought this trailer, I was not totally unfamiliar with solar power. I owned a boat in San Diego for about 20 years and lived on it for a few years before I relocated to Arizona. And it was powered by solar, not the propulsion, but the cabin power. So I've had several years of dealing with a 12-volt solar system and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. So I knew that coming in, and still I made some fundamental mistakes with this unit. And that's the purpose of this video, not just to educate for those of you who aren't familiar with solar power and how it works, or maybe apprehensive about it, but if you are, to just kind of talk about some of the things that I learned that were a little bit different, and part of a learning curve for this camper and getting it so that it runs smoothly on solar power. So with that, let's get started. As almost all of these units are nowadays, this was a solar plug and play, and this is on the outlet. It's on the front back of the unit. That sounds kind of funny, does it? Front back, but it's on the back side toward the front of the unit. And let's see if I can get a little closer here. It says scan the QR code, and it says ZAMP Solar, and then below it it says ZAMP Solar Dometic. So that's exactly what I did, because when I bought it, it did not come, and they did not offer the panels and the setup for the plug and play, so I had to go buy that separately. And I did that, took me to the ZAMP website, where I could find the correct connector. Now, I'm not going to unplug that because it's charging right now, and that would be an interruption. But it comes with the proper connector, and this is standard. And even now, when the other connectors, like see right below that connection right below it, that is different now. So I've had this unit now, this is the second year, and the connectors below, which I'll show in more detail later, seem to be something of the past, and there's a new type of connector. But the connector to the unit itself, that is still the same. So scan the QR code, go to the website, and that should get you started with what plug and play is right for you. What I opted for was the ZAMP Obsidian. And some of the characteristics of the Obsidian is the carrying case. So it comes in this highly ruggedized carrying case, props up, as you can see. The little rubber doodads there, those little notches, what look like notches, allow for you to put the panel at different angles. And when I'm done with this, I should probably change the angle as the sun is going high in the sky. But you can see the case. So this particular panel is not quite 100, interestingly enough. It's 95 watts, a 95 watt panel. Now it comes, of course, with the cord, and I think it's 10 or 15 feet. And then I did buy an extension because, of course, one of the first things I learned was that sometimes consistent all-day sun is really hard to come by. And even though ideally you don't want to use an extension because it just adds resistance every time you add wire, right? Sometimes you have to. So this was what I got initially. Now turning behind me, this is a smaller of the same thing. This is a 45 watt panel, and I bought this because I was having some problems under certain conditions, I thought, getting charged up during the course of the day, and that's something we're going to talk a lot about. Now what I did here was I took these out so that you can, let me get a better view here, so that you could see the connectors. This is the female connector that you can, apparently hard to get, and then that's the male. And all these are designed to plug into each other. And what I did when I bought the this secondary panel, I had to buy a Y connector in order to connect this small panel to the large panel. Okay, so this is the small panel again, and I've opened it up and I've just laid the panel down. It's not connected to anything. But this surface right here, this is the part that is going to be on the ground. This is the doohickey that props the panel up. And as you can see, there's debris on that piece. What happens is, this is kind of a felt, it almost feels like a felt type material, and stuff sticks to it. And that's one of the things I don't like. The bottom line is, as I pan from that panel to the next, this is the condition you're going to be in. You're going to be in dirt, rocks, things like that. And you're going to have to move these panels around as the sun moves. Or when you go to hike, you know what I do is I pick a spot, I try and look at the line of where the sun is going to go. I watch the rise, I watch the set, you know, especially the sunset when I first get there, and then I can make an estimate of the path of the sun. And before I leave for a hike, I can set up the panel in kind of a neutral position, if you will, where it's getting the most sun during the day, knowing that I may have to adjust it when I get back. But you're moving it around. And right now, that large panel is fully flat in the little holders because the sun is high over the sky. When it's propped up and that felt is more exposed and you start moving it around, that's when it starts to get dirty. And it doesn't just clean off. It's a bear to clean it off. So that's one of the disadvantages of this obsidian set. The case itself is indeed super durable. So that is a good thing. But that felt, it catches debris. You can see how scraped up the case is. But that felt catches debris and you can't get it all off. And of course my concern with that is that it's going to damage the panel in transit. Now when I bought the initial panel, the 95 watt panel, I figured it was all I was going to need. Again, I was pretty familiar with solar because of my experience with the boat. The battery that the dealer provided me with, they only dealt in one battery type. It is a Battleborn 100 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. So that was totally different. I was still using huge lead acid batteries on the boat. So making the change to that battery type was also a little learning experience in and of itself. But when you went online to buy the panels, and I'm assuming even through Dometic it's going to be the same, you can buy just plain panels like that little 45 watt panel of mine. It is a panel alone. It is not a control panel. Or you can buy a panel with a charger controller. Now this is what you have to do initially. So that 95 watt panel I bought with a charger controller. This is the charger controller that came with it. And the reason I bring this up is it's in my hand. It's not in the unit. This was a major change, epiphany, game changer, and that was getting a better charger controller. This is very basic. So as you can see, it has the little bar graph to give you an idea of the battery level. And you do have your charger controllers, it has a battery type button. They all have that. So you may still be using lead acid batteries. You may be using lithium ion. This is lithium iron phosphate. And so it lists out the different battery types, and you have to put in the battery type that you're using, because that's how the charger controller knows how to work. Now the way this worked is, and we'll get a close-up of this in a sec, is right in here it had 2 screws that attached magnets to it. And in the back compartment of the panel, behind the fabric, they put a metal plate. And how this was set up is it would be with the panels, and the magnets would attach it to the metal plate, and the charger controller would then be with the panels, not with the unit. That is key. Now this and the charger controller I currently have, they can't get wet. So there's a mechanism on the panels to try and prevent that. But this is the charger controller that came with it. And so now I'm ready to tell you the progressive, maybe sad story about how I got to where I'm at today. This is a little bit of a long story, so bear with me. So when I was buying the unit, it turns out my salesman, good salesman, nice guy, you know, personable, just what you want in a salesperson, but he was not well versed in the power and 12 volt and the batteries, and even what his own dealership provided and what they did. And the other side of the coin is, you know, because I already had solar experience, I didn't ask a lot of questions, even though I had never had a camper RV before. So right out of the chute, my advice is ask a lot of questions when you're dealing with the salesperson. And if he or she doesn't know the answer, have them go back to their service department and find out, because this led to an error on my part that I would have liked to have been different. It's not earth-shattering, but here's what happened. Okay, so they gave me no choice in the battery. They just provide Battle-Born batteries, which is fine. It's a good battery. I have no complaints about that. Like I said, 100 amp hours. And you just have to figure that what you really have is 50 amp hours. That's just the nature of batteries. You really need to plan your power use based on half. All right, so he said, this is what we do. And none of this stuff comes with. This is extra. Now we're in the realm of extra stuff, because it has hookups. For all they know, you're never going to use battery power. You're just going to go to hookup sites all the time. So I have to buy the battery. That's extra. And then I told him I wanted an inverter installed. And he quoted me a price of like $800 and some odd dollars, almost $900. Now, I had seen inverters. I don't need a huge inverter because I'm not going to be running gobs of AC type stuff. For example, on the boat, I had a 2,500 watt inverter, but I don't need that in a camper. And I knew from my experience that the appliances that I wanted to run, and this was a big deal for me, I wanted to be able to use a coffee maker. Boiling water and making coffee that way over propane, like I did for years and years and years and years, is fine, but it takes time, especially when you're outside and it's cold and the water's cold. And you want coffee, right? It's first thing in the morning, and it seems like it's taking forever for the water to boil. And I thought, I just don't want to do that anymore. I want to be able to, I have this huge battery, and I knew the wattages because I'd done this on the boat, right? I want to be able to make coffee. And I knew a small coffee maker, the wattage was 1100 watts. So I need at least a 1500 watt inverter in my mind, right? I also wanted to be able to run a microwave from time to time. Now, I don't want to bake potatoes in it, right? And run it for 15, 20 minutes. That won't work. But there are things I'd like to heat up. And quickly, 1 minute or 30 seconds or whatever, that are hard to heat up on a propane grill or in that environment. So again, a small microwave is 1200 watts. So I already knew that. And again, I said, okay, I need a 1500 watt inverter. So they quoted me this $900 price. And I said, I can get a 1500 watt inverter for a lot cheaper than that, about half the price. So I said, let me go get my own. If I buy my own, will you install it? And they said, yeah, we'll do that. So I went out and I bought a 1700, couldn't find a 1700 watt inverter, and they installed it for me. And when I was back there with the service people, he said, you're going to have to plug in directly to this to use it. And I'm like, what? And he said, well, if we had installed the inverter for you, you'd be able to use any of your AC outlets. And I'm like, well, that's what I wanted. But you see, the salesperson didn't explain that part of that $900 cost was wiring it in so that all the AC outlets worked. And I was too dingy, I guess, to not ask more questions about it. And actually, at that point in time, they hadn't installed the inverter I bought yet. So I could have said, you know what, I'll just return this. Let's go down that route. I said, just put it in, and we'll run an extension to where I want the outlet. And now that's worked out well, because there's, as you've seen from the inside of the unit, there isn't a lot of counter space. You're very limited on where you can put something like a coffee maker. And I put it on the little table. And there is no AC outlet close to that. So this worked out. But what's funny is, and I'll show you this when we go to the inside and I show you what I think will be my final setup. But in the plywood over the bench, because this cord wraps around, comes out, next to the kitchen area, dining area, and he put a hole in the plywood up so it would go up into the pad, and then put this open close so I could open it, pull the cord out, and then stick it back in. So I fixed that so it would work the way I wanted, but again, I'll show you that when we get inside. The upshot of this long conversation is that I didn't ask enough questions, and the salesperson wasn't well versed enough to tell me, look, here's what we'll do. We install the inverter, and I think their inverter was a little bit larger than mine. I think it was a 2,000 watt inverter. And all your AC outlets, when the inverter is on, will work. So I just did it my way, figured I can make this work. I'll just figure something out and make it go the way I wanted to do. But that is part of the sad story of power, so that you don't have to go through all this. Now, the next thing that happened is, I'm used to having 400 amp hours. That's what I had on the boat. So say 200 amp hours available, which is a lot of flexibility. Well, now I've got 50 amp hours. And this unit has a little refrigerator. It's all 12 volt. When you're driving, it charges while you're driving. So wherever you're going, in theory, it should be fully charged by the time you get there. And then throwing out the panels and getting the unit on power is one of the first things that I do when I arrive. Now, when I first started, keep in mind, I have that little charger controller that came with the Obsidian set. And when I first started, I cranked that refrigerator up to the highest cold. The reason I did that is because, silly me, I like beer when I'm out, and I like it ice cold. And so I thought, well, I should have plenty of power to run the refrigerator at whatever temperature I wanted. And so I had it on 7. And I was camped, I believe, in Kings Canyon. Now, Kings Canyon is in the mountains in California, right? And so there isn't a lot of sun. That was an area where you really had to pay a lot of attention to the panels, and sadly, you had to do more moving than you might like. The site I had just didn't have a small spot that got a lot of sunlight during the day. And I was there, and I woke up at night to pee like I do sometimes, and the lights inside the unit that tell you that it's getting enough battery power, they were off. And I thought, uh-oh, I don't have any battery. My battery's dead. And I chalked that up to I just wasn't getting enough sun. So what I had to do there was buy a bag of ice and throw it in the refrigerator in order to get through the trip, not really understanding what was going on. But that's what I did. And then I thought, okay, what am I going to do? That's when I thought about maybe I need another panel so that whatever sun I'm in, I bring in more energy. But then I took another trip to northern Arizona, and this was also in the mountains at Sunset Crater National Monument, but there was plenty of sun. Unlike the Kings Canyon, there was right next to me, there was this huge area where I had a lot of sun. So same scenario, refrigerator up to 7, but this time I thought I'm not going to have any problems because I've got plenty of sun. There's this big area I can put the panel in when I'm gone, and I'll come back and everything will be fine. But same thing. At night, the lights went out and I lost the battery. It charged up again, but I lost that. Now, I also... One night it stayed on. The light stayed on. So I turn on the inverter to make coffee, and it makes it, but you leave the coffee pot on, right? Because it's heating, turning off, heating, turning off. And that reminds me, when you're dealing with things like a coffee maker or a toaster oven, things of this nature that generate heat of that kind, they're not on all the time. That's what makes them workable. The coffee maker, yeah, it takes a lot of power, but most of that power is used when it's actually brewing the coffee. And I can watch it on the app. I'll go from the battery being at, say, 90 some odd % in the morning because it has used a little through the night, to being 70 some odd % after having made coffee. But once it gets past that brew, it shuts off. And then it only turns on for brief little bits of time to heat, and then it shuts off again. That's what makes it workable. If it were going to be running full bore for 10 minutes or something, it wouldn't be workable. But because that's how those types of appliances work, you can manage it and make it work. Anyway, back to the Bonito campground experience. There were clouds, the sun was in and out of clouds, and I'm brewing the coffee, and all of a sudden there's this noise. And what it is, and this is what you have to be aware of when I say 100 amp hours, 50 amp hours, that noise was the inverter. The inverter needs to sense it has the full-on 12 volts in order for it to work. And what happens is when you try and have it on and it senses the battery cannot provide the full-on 12 volts, it makes this alarm noise and it shuts down. So in other words, there was not enough, even though I might look at it, let's say, because I'm running the refrigerator at 7, right, top speed. And even though I may look at the battery in the morning and the battery says 70%, and I think, oh great, I've got plenty, it ran it down to the point where the inverter didn't sense that it had the full 12 volts and it just shut down. And I'm like, what the devil is going on? So my conclusion then was that, okay, it's been in and out of clouds. Maybe I'm just not getting enough energy during the day. So that's when I bought the second panel, the 45 watt panel. The problem is that didn't solve the problem either. I was still not having enough power to run the inverter in the morning and do everything I wanted to do. So the first thing I concluded was I can't run the refrigerator at 7. It's just, that's the primary draw on the battery, and it's just too much. So what am I going to do? I have to turn that down and find a temperature that keeps the food cold and preserved but doesn't run the battery. And then what? Oh my God, what will I do about beer, right? So what I did was I bought a small Yeti cooler, and now I have to deal with ice. But I bought this small cooler specifically to put beer in. And yeah, that means sometimes I have to replenish the ice. And now I readjusted the refrigerator to 3. So now I keep it at 3, and lo and behold, my energy in the morning has changed. But it's still not really good. It still seemed to me that during the day, even in and out of clouds, it just wasn't charging efficiently. Something wasn't working right. So at that point, I went online, back to the 10,000 YouTube videos, right? And I started looking at charger controllers. And lo and behold, what I learned through that research was the little charger controller that came with my panel is relatively inefficient. That if you want to have efficient charging and cloudy weather and, heavy draw, like in the morning, if I'm doing a microwave and I'm doing the coffee maker, that's a heavy draw in the morning. And you want to make sure your battery gets fully charged and stays charged. You need a more efficient charger controller, and lo and behold, it was out there. And that's where I want to go now, is showing the new charger controller and talking about how that worked. So when I had the battery and the inverter put in, I also asked them to please install a gauge. I mean, you can't just put that stuff in and then you don't know what's going on with your battery. So this gauge it's a Victron gauge, and it's very basic. You can scroll through. I'm not going to show you that, but you can scroll through to see different aspects of your battery. And in this screen, which is where I leave it, it tells me how many volts are available, 13.38, and the charger controller will limit that as power continues to come in. And this is cut off at 14 something, I don't remember, but you will see it all the way up to 14 when you're getting a lot of power. And then up in the upper right, that's a V, so you can also look at amp hours and amps. And then down in the lower right, that's a standard battery bar, and it's showing you that the battery is 100%. And then you've got some buttons where you can scroll through and look at other things, but I haven't found those useful. The reason is there's an app, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But this is a Victron gauge. Excuse me, I didn't ask for Victron. They just installed it. But it turns out that is a good twist of fate. So after hours of research on the internet and reading, I read blogs, what people who actually use the stuff have to say, and lo and behold, this is what I wound up buying. Yes, it is a Victron, same brand as my gauge, interestingly enough. By the way, that gauge is a smart gauge. This is a smart charger controller. And you just want to look at MPPT is the type of charger controller that it is. And this type of charger controller was said to be, by multiple sources, much more efficient than that little charger controller, excuse me, that came with the Obsidian panel set. So this is what I went ahead and bought. You can read all the specs for yourself online, but here's a funny story about it. When I looked at it, sometimes I'm such a ding-dong, but I mean, I'm old, right? When I looked at it online, this little square thing, I thought, okay, it's about the same size, it looks like, and saw people hold it. In the videos, it's the same size as the little one that I have. So I figured my initial thought was I would just swap it out and keep it in the panel package, the the space in the obsidian panel package that housed the controller. I just take the magnets off and stick it to the metal plate. And by the way, on that, there's a solid clear plastic. So you put it, that's where the plate is, and you put it so you can see the charger controller through the plastic. And then, like I said, it can't get wet, so it's all sealed up. So I thought, okay, I'll just put it there, swap out the magnets and swap out the wires, and we should be good to go, right? Well, when it arrived, it's actually not only larger in dimension, which isn't a big deal, but because of that, it's also heavier. Also, it has space between the charger controller itself and the back plate to allow for circulation. So it's also more sensitive to heat. And of course, it can't get wet. So I'm thinking, well, okay, it didn't work with the magnets. That was my first thing. So I put it on the magnets, stuck it in the bag against the plate, and in moving the panels around, it just kind of flew all over the place. Now, I think it was when I was at Goosenecks was the first time I had this out, and it just wouldn't stay to the magnet. So now it's just on the bottom of the bag, right? And that's where the wires come in. They come in at the bottom of the unit, and it stopped working. I'm like, it's brand new, right? This is the first trip. What the devil? And when I took it out and looked at it, the wires had come loose because they're just sitting on the bottom of the bag, and it's moving around because you're moving the panels around. So I tightened them up. It was no big deal, easy enough to figure out, tighten them up. And I thought, okay, I'm going to need to do something different. So when I got home, I bought a cutting board, and I mounted the charger controller on this cutting board with the bottom of it up. And now what I started doing was I'm just going to put that cutting board, it was big enough to fit, I should say small enough to fit in the bag. And because it's mounted on that, those wires won't be dragging on the bottom, and they shouldn't come loose. Then, this was more recently. This was just, I'm going to say about a month ago, believe it or not. It's looked like, as a matter of fact, I think I was out in the wildlife refuge, but the battery didn't indicate that it was at 100%. It was like 95 or something like that. And the charger controller was in float mode. And I'm like, that can't be right. It shouldn't go to float until it's 100% charged, right? So again, what the devil is going on? So I just made that work. And again, when I got home and looked at it, the wires had come loose again. So my conclusion was, this charger controller in that bag, there's just too much movement. Even though I thought I had it protected, it's moving around too much. One other thing, I always, since I got this, worried about the rain. Zippers don't keep water out. If they're stitching, like where that little clear plastic window was, they're stitching around that doesn't keep water out. And especially when you're out, in an area like this where I'm at now, some of the wind and rain, it picks up. And I thought, I already was worried about that overnight. And then if I went away during the day and it rained during the day and I wasn't there to, make sure everything was protected. So I thought, I've got to come up with something different. It's just not working, this charger controller bouncing around in the bag. And I also worried about this new one, about it getting too hot, because heat was more of an issue for this. And when it's zipped up in, black fabric that is thick and it's out in the sun, that's getting pretty hot with no air circulation. So now I'm worrying about that too. So I thought, I've got to figure out something different. So that brings us to present day. I'm going to show you what I did, and I'm going to talk about the efficiency level of this charger controller. There she blows! So that is my new charger controller. You can see the cutting board that I mounted it on, quite colorful, isn't it? And it is, yes, it is inside the unit, underneath one of the bench seats, right outside the solar plug-in. So you can see that wire to the left of it, that conduit. That, I believe, is the solar plug-in. And so what I had to do, whoops, let's go the other way, was I had to drill a new hole, and I looked around to make sure I wasn't going to go through any existing wires, but I drilled a hole through the unit, the bottom, the floor of it, right outside where the plug-in for the solar is. And I just left this on the cutting board and propped it against that wood. And then those two blue things, you see, that's actually a continuous rag. And I put that behind that because I wasn't sure how much it was going to move in transit. So it kind of protects it from banging too much against that and then from sliding too much back and forth. Now, it seemed to work because that's pretty much where I put it initially. Now, in order to do this installation and bring this thing inside, which is what I should have done in the first place, right? But this is why I'm trying to save you my headaches. I had to buy yet another extension, and I wanted 5 feet, but the shortest I could get was 10. Again, trying to manage the resistance that wiring adds. And it took a little while because when I went on the ZAMP website, they were done, and they were rolling over to be totally owned and operated by Dometic. So you really couldn't get anything. And at the time when I first started looking, Dometic didn't have anything. So I was kind of like, I wonder if this is going to work with the cords that I have, because I needed the one extension in case, just like here, I had to use that extension to get my panel to a spot where it would be full on sun and I wouldn't have to do too much moving around. But lo and behold, once the conversion to Dometic was complete, they did have some cords available with the right connectors. And I was able to get this 10-foot cord to go from the charger controller to the plug-in. And then the other, of course, goes from the charger controller to the panels. Now that grommet that is sitting there, that is totally unslit. It's just a solid grommet. And when I pull those cords in, I actually put that over the opening there as a part of the protection. Now what this means for setup, see, on one hand, this is a little bit more setup because I have to take the bench seat apart in order to get these cords out of the hole and to where they need to go. But that's no big deal because I just do that before I set up the dinette. And then, I just put everything together and I'm done. I don't have to look at it anymore. Why? Because these are smart devices, and there is an app through Victron, which you can look at the status of them at any time. And yeah, we'll do that as we get to the end of the video. So what I want to do now is show you what I did underneath on the outside to accommodate these wires. So I knew that grommet, that's not going to be enough protection. So what I did was I bought just a standard electrical outside outlet protector. It had the ability to just have a single large hole without, anything else, so I didn't have to drill that out. It came with that option. And it has, the weather stripping here and the weather stripping around it. And then this I just use when the wires aren't there. There's you can see that little mini carabiner is through a little loop. Well, there's a loop in the lid too. And when the wires are tucked in at travel time, I just put that carabiner through those loops and it keeps that lid from popping open. Not that it would because it's on a spring, but you never know. So I just put that through there, and that keeps it from popping open. So I feel real good about this because this outlet protector provides some weatherproofing, especially this around here, because water's going to splash up as you're towing, right? That's the concern. And then I still put the grommet on the inside as a little bit extra, just to make sure, nothing pops up. So this has worked out really, really well. One other kind of side note, excuse me, while we're here looking at this, that blue cord, and you see how it crosses the corner there? And if I can get over there, you see how that's a plug? That's the extension cord I mentioned earlier coming from the inverter that I had installed. And what I wanted to be able to do was plug in. And like I said, there's no AC outlets around here. So this, where I wanted to put it, just to give you some sense, see, there's the coffee maker. And I set it on the corner of the table. And I didn't want to have an extension cord strung across, but I mean, where else am I going to put it? I mean, really, the only other place would have been here, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just set it on the table. So I just bought this multi-plug, plugged it into the cord, drilled a hole through there, plugged it into the cord, and then used that zip tie there to kind of put a little tension on it. I still have to hold this when I unplug, because if I just pull it, of course, it's going to unplug it from the extension cord, which, yes, has happened. And then, so that keeps it relatively tight, but I also put, see, a little metal holder there, just a little small metal bracket that's used for like shelving or something, and it sets on it. Obviously, this is power. You can't just drill holes through it and put screws in. So it sets on those little metal brackets, and then there's a little tension on the extension cord. And yeah, I have to hold it when I plug and, unplug so that it doesn't totally disconnect from the inverter. But yeah, that's how I manage that. And like the closest AC outlet, see, is under the sink. And again, I just didn't want to, there's no place to put the coffee maker there, and I didn't want to string extension cords across. So this has worked out really well. All right, so hopefully this is working. Looks like it is. So this is the Victron app, and this is showing you both the smart devices that I have. The top, and you can see in the upper left, the little picture of the gauge is the gauge that I showed you earlier. And below that is the charger controller itself. So these connect via Bluetooth through the app. So this is why I don't push buttons on the gauge, and this is why I don't worry about seeing the charger controller. You can see everything here. So let's start with the top, the gauge. 13.47 volts it's putting out. The current is right around 5 amps. That's what's flowing in from the panel. Starter battery, I assume if you were using it in that way, that'd be useful. It's a non-issue to me. State of charge is 100%. And let me just tell you, it's 10:30 in the morning. I made coffee this morning. It's a perfectly sunny day. The battery is already charged up. It was down to 79% when I was done with the coffee, and now it's fully charged. Now, I can guarantee you with the other charger controller, that would not be the case. Between me not being so weird about the refrigerator and resigning myself to a lower temperature and having to deal with ice and getting a highly efficient, as a matter of fact, they rated at 98% efficiency, this charger controller. I haven't had a problem since, other than the loose wire issues. Because of my loose setup, it's worked splendidly. I mean, it's amazing. I don't have to worry about power anymore. And now that extra little panel, I only will use that in cloudy weather. It's just overkill when it's sunny. But when it's cloudy, I have it. I'll hook it up, and I'm sure I'll be just fine in that kind of weather. And of course, 0 amp hours consumed because the battery's at 100%. So that's the gauge. Below that is the charger controller. So current available voltage is 14.17. Again, it's taking in power. How much? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Yield today, 150 watt hours. Power, that's what's coming in, 75 watts. So I have a 95 watt panel out there. It's currently bringing in 75 watts of power. Current, 5.2, that's what's flowing through. That's almost matches what the gauge shows. So basically, we have 5 amps that the charger controller is allowing to flow in, and it's still in bulk. Now keep in mind, the battery state of charge is a range. It's not exact. So when it actually senses that the battery absolutely cannot take any more power. And by the way, while we've been recording this, I did have the inverter on to charge up my Bose speaker. It's fully charged, so I've turned it off. So it was using power. I had my phone on charge for a little bit, and that's a minuscule amount of power, but still, it's what it does is it draws from the battery, and then the battery gets replenished via solar. I don't know how much time that takes, but it's pretty, I'm going to say, almost instantaneous. Anyway, and on the right, looking at the charger controller, that's the mode that it's in. It's bulk, so it's still taking in bulk. Once it gets to a certain point, it's going to move to absorption. And then again, once it senses the battery cannot take any more and there's no demands on it, like I'm not charging something or turning a light on or whatever, it's going to go to float mode. And 100% charge float mode. And that means basically that any excess is being dissipated as heat. So that is how you look at your system. Now, what's interesting about this is, see, if I had known all this in advance, Victron actually makes a smart battery. And then everything would be in sync with each other. Again, not that the battery I have is a problem. It works just dandy. But looking at this and seeing how well this works together, you know, I kind of think, God, it'd be nice to have that battery. But they're very expensive, and I'll worry about that when the need is actually there. Well, that's it for my look at power. Sorry if there was a lot of talk, and it took a little bit longer. But again, if I can keep others from making some of the same mistakes I did in the trial and error learning of how to set things up, then that's my goal. And I would also encourage you not to be afraid of solar. You know, some people think you just are living on the edge, and you can certainly feel that way. But my experience with now having the right refrigerator temperature and the right charger controller and the right amount of panels, it makes all the difference. I think now if I went to that campsite in Kings Canyon, or the next time I'm in a campsite where sun is fleeting and you kind of have to maneuver around that, I think I'd do much, much better. Why? Because when it's in the spot that has the sun, even if it's only for an hour or two, it's going to charge much more efficiently. And therefore, when it's not in the sun, you just don't feel the same kind of pain that I felt on that trip. So that's the key, is understanding your equipment and having the right setup for you and for your usage. Pretty much now, I'm always making coffee with the coffee maker. I still have my other stuff, just in case something goes awry. But I don't really anticipate that. It works like a champ, and I'm extremely happy with it. With that, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the old outdoors. Thanks again.